So the first thing about this is why do we differentiate? And look, this is a slide that I think has actually got too many words on it. But the reason the words are here and the reason there were a few slides like this is because there are some key points. And I recognise that we have people from all around the world coming onto the course tonight. You're very welcome. It's different times of day for everybody. And this is going to be put onto YouTube later. So it means that you can translate this into your own language, and hopefully it will just help you with the best understanding possible. So differentiate just simply means making things different for different people. And we can do that best when we think about people as individuals. I'm just going to ask anybody new that's come in, could you just make sure that you've muted yourself, please? I can hear quite a lot of stuff coming through. Thank you. So probably if all of us around the world, if we were introducing Boccia to a new group of people, we would probably introduce it in a similar way, because there's some essential things we need to tell people, like how they can propel the ball, they must sit on a chair, they must aim at the white ball, and the aim of the game is to get their colour closer than the other colour. So there are certain things we have to do. And so when we start, we're probably all doing something really, really similar. And I imagine there's quite a few people here on the call that have introduced Boccia to lots of different people. And the thing is, as soon as we start getting those players interacting with us, we start to understand that they need different things. And a good example is I always get somebody who wants to know everything about the rules. But what if all the time? They keep asking questions. And then I get somebody else who says, well, have I got to throw it this way, or can I throw it a different way? And how can I make that better? And so straight away, we've got people who have different needs. They want to be coached. They want to learn different things. And that's why we need to be able to change our coaching. But also when we get those new people in Boccia, I think to keep them involved, we really need to experience success. They need to be good at what they're doing. And we know that success looks very different between one player and another. And you may be able to think of a player you know who is happy to get their ball within a metre of the jack, and another player that you know that will be unhappy if the ball is more than 5 centimetres from the jack. So success is different to different people. So how can we coach them the same if success looks different? And then for players who want to progress, giving them the right amount of challenge is essential. It's a bit like the picture of the ladder. The ladder has rungs as it goes up. And if you make those rungs too far apart, you can't actually reach the next rung of the ladder. So you can't progress, you can't go any higher. And if you make those rungs too close together, it takes a long, long time if you have to step on every rung. And what we as coaches have got to do is actually decide how far apart can those rungs go so that our players can progress, they can achieve the next stage and the next stage and so on. And we don't make things too easy or too hard for them. And therefore, if we treat everyone the same, if we coach everybody the same, we're only ever going to be right for some of the people, some of the time. So what does your player want? So on the left here, I have got a little list of things that a social Boccia player might want. So as we can see, I've said that they probably want to have fun. They may want to meet others. They're not really bothered about doing any training. In fact, they might actively say they don't want to do any training. They just want to play the game. They're not that serious. They have a laugh and a joke about it, and the results don't really matter. At the other end of the scale, we've got our competitive Boccia players. And for those of you that don't know, this picture is of David Smith, who's a BC1 world champion and Paralympic gold medalist. So you've probably got people in your country and people you know that are on that competitive ladder. They want to be the best, whether it's in your club, in your area, in your nation, or in the world. And I just wonder if we might use the chat function now to write down some of the things that we think this player on the right needs, this competitive player, whether it's David or somebody else you know, what do those competitive players want? So if you take your cursor down to the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, you should find the chat function. And I think you can just write in there. And then I'm hoping that Michaela might be able to share with us a few of the things that are written down. Or can I see the chat as well? Let's look.
Can you see the chat function?
I can now, yes.
Okay.
So challenge I can see has been put down there. Lots of training, dedicated strength and conditioning, making progress, being challenged again, doing drills, lots of support, and lots of really good ideas. So lots of things there that are really quite different. The best coaching. Fun, yeah, why not? Physiotherapy and sports therapy. So we're thinking of things outside of our own coaching as well. And results, really important. Okay, so I'm just going to come out of that chat function again, but do by all means keep sharing things on there. So you can see we've got players here with very different needs. And if players have different needs, then we need to provide something different for each of them. So change the coaching. Don't try and change the athlete. So there are some simple ways that you can adapt your coaching so that you can meet the individual needs of all your players. And that's what I'm going to obviously spend most of the time in this on. But gaining as much knowledge as you can is going to give you the best chance of understanding how you can respond to any specific coaching needs of your athlete. Now, that's not something I can give you. So hopefully I'm going to give you a few more ideas today and a few more sort of strategies. But actually, come on as many webinars as you can, talk to as many other coaches as you can, talk to athletes, watch previous matches, go on YouTube, see what you can find on there. There's a lot of information out there. And the more you can absorb, the more things you're going to have in your kind of coaching tool bag, which might help you to respond to the individual needs of a specific athlete. And to anybody that's fairly new with their coaching or in their development, please don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, questions are really important. First thing that I ask an athlete when I meet them very often is, what's your best bit? And so if I have an athlete that comes in and in England, we love to strap everybody into their chairs. There's foot straps and chest straps and all sorts of straps. But sometimes I'll ask that question and their best bit might be their foot. And if I take that strap off and allow that foot out, actually that foot might be great at propelling a boccia ball. But we don't know just from looking at the athlete. We have to ask the question. I once asked that question and somebody said, I can only move my right elbow, just a small amount up and down. So we were able to make a ramp that came up to the right elbow so that the ball can be released with the right elbow. So ask those questions. Ask questions of other people. Ask the physiotherapists. Ask the sports psychologists. Ask anybody that you can. What do I need to know about your athlete? What do I need to know about boccia? And particularly, don't be afraid to try new ideas. Your idea might be the thing that pushes your athlete to number one. And just because nobody has thought of it before doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. So, or the wrong thing to do rather. So try things. I've had lots of fun with athletes where we've tried some things and we've fallen about laughing because it's clearly not going to work. And other times where we've tried things and been amazed at what we've tried and that it works. So please try things out. Your athletes will really thank you for trying things out. And finally, embrace failure. It's okay to get it wrong, because all those times we've laughed when we've got it wrong, actually we were working towards a time when we got it right. And so that's really important to embrace failure, allow that, you will find success. And just remember that athletes are different. Problems are different. Don't expect the answers to be the same. But just because you have two BC4 athletes, it doesn't mean that they are going to throw the ball the same way or have the same ideas. They are individuals and they need to be seen as individuals. So this is somebody that I used to coach, and I just want to highlight some of those things I've just said about having this open mind and changing things. So on the left, you can see that the athlete is strapped down. There are straps on his feet. There are straps, if you look carefully, over his knees. He has a waist strap as well, and he's holding on really tight to the rim of his wheelchair with his left hand. And we did that because at the time, there were quite a lot of coaches who thought if you have an athlete with athetoid movement, that's shaky movement, then we need to kind of strap them down and we need to make them as still as possible to help them to control when they release the ball. And we thought things were going quite well. And another coach came along and said, I think you should take the straps off. And both the athlete and myself were like, whoa, I don't know, we've always done this. We wanted to have a closed mind. But we decided we should listen to the other coach. And we opened our mind and said, we're going to try this. We're going to try it for 6 weeks. We're going to do this all the time. And we tried it. And a strange thing happened. In training, I decided, well, if he has no straps, he's going to really need a good core. So we need to do some exercise on his core muscles in his body. And so I asked him to take both his hands off of the chair and to throw without holding on at all. So now not only have we taken off the straps, we've taken off the hand as well, which went completely against everything. We didn't actually expect it to work. I just wanted to train his core a little more. And as you can see in the picture on the right, when his left arm was allowed to just rise to where it wanted to go, actually he got in a much better position. If you look on the right, he has no straps on his feet, but his feet aren't lifting. If you look on the left, his feet are actually still lifting where his spasm wants a way to get out. If you look on the right, he has his shoulder over his hand. It's a lovely delivery position. And we discovered that for this athlete, actually having neither hand holding on was the best thing. And we went back to the other coaches and we went, do you know what? That's a great idea to take the straps off. And we've taken his hand off as well. And the other coaches went, no, don't do that. And then when they saw it, they went, yeah, it's right. It's right for this athlete. That's really important. And that solution took us by surprise. We didn't know that we were going to find this new thing. So it's really important. Keep that open mind, try things out. Remember that athletes are different. So, ideas and rules can be good, but sometimes they're not right. Solutions can take you by surprise. Be prepared for lots of failures before you find success. So here's the start of me giving you some ideas about how you can adapt things. And I feel very strongly that first thing we should all do is start from a point of success. So I want you to think about how, if you were the athlete, how would you feel about these two drills? So number one, the drill on the left, you have 2 cones and the athletes have been asked to throw the balls between the cones. And the arrows show you where some of the balls have gone. And on the right, we have 1 cone and the athletes have been asked to hit the cone. And the arrows show where the balls might have gone. What I'd like you to think about is how would you feel if you were an athlete doing task number 1 or if you're an athlete doing task number 2. So again, can you pop that into the chat function and just write 1 and then a word to describe your feeling, or 2 and a word to describe that feeling. I'm just going to find my chat function again. 1 success, 2 frustration. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, happy and not so happy from Gary. It's very good from Jan. If you're a starter, then maybe 1. But actually, if you are later on, you may want to do 2. I think that's really important, isn't it? Jaspreet says 1 makes you feel good. And AGM, success and failure. So we're getting a lot of people saying the same things, aren't we? That we could use these to progress, but actually the same athlete might feel that number 1 was too easy. They might feel actually that that's been successful. Number 2 might be too hard. It makes you feel like a failure. And actually, you know, if we want people to come back, we want them to have success. So I think starting with success is really important. And yes, we might progress to number 2 later on, but we want to progress at the time when some of those arrows are actually going to hit the target and not when all of the arrows are going to miss the target. So this is called the comfort stretch panic model. It's something from Karl Ronke. I probably haven't said that correctly. I apologize to anybody who speaks German. But the important thing is this talks about a comfort zone, a stretch zone, and a panic zone. And in the middle, in that blue area, we've got our comfort zone. And this might be where our social players want to stay all the time. This is the place where something is really, really easy and you could do it all day long. You don't need any training and you can always be successful. So in fact, this is where, if you've got your screwed up piece of paper or your rolled up sock or your ball, we're going to try something now. So we may need to adapt this. I can already see that we have some players with us. So players, bear with me, please. Because we're going to do our adapting a little bit later. So I'm going to ask you to take your item, put it in your best hand, or if you think you're going to need 2 hands, use 2 hands. And we're going to throw it and catch it so that we can do it easily. So I want you to see how high it goes so that you can still catch. And to stay in our comfort zone, we have to make sure we can catch it every time so that we're always successful. So if anybody fancies switching on their camera and letting us see you as well, that's great. And let's try. So let's throw and catch. Just see how far you can go, how high you can go with success. Now, because this is our challenge, our comfort zone, and this is quite easy, even though I'm having to concentrate on it while I talk to you, actually it is probably going to get pretty boring quite quickly. And as most of you are coaches or players on here, I think you want to be challenged more. So I need to push you into your stretch zone. And this is really the area where you're going to be successful some of the time, but not all of the time. So I want you to try and make this harder. So you might make it harder by throwing it higher in the air. You might make it harder by changing into your non-dominant hand. There are lots of other ways. If you want to do it on your head or something like that, that's fine. I know that maybe Orna will go for that. But so let's try and make it harder. We want to move into our stretch zone. So for me, how high can I make it go? I can catch it some of the time, but not all of the time. I'm going to move back a bit for this one. And this is why we're using paper and socks. Oh, I'm forgetting. I've used 2 hands to catch it, so that's not good. I've got to keep going with the 1 hand. Oh. So actually, I can't go. Oh, really push yourself. Oh, I've dropped it. And that point, that height that you get to, or maybe moving to the other hand, where sometimes you're successful and sometimes you're not, that's the stretch zone. And the stretch zone is where learning takes place. That's where we have to start adjusting. We start thinking about what we're doing and we start adjusting what we're doing to see if we can be successful more of the time. We start evaluating, well, what am I doing when I'm successful? And what am I doing when I'm unsuccessful? And how can I sort it out so that I'm always successful? That's why we're learning there. And that's a place where there's the right amount of challenge for most people, where it's just out of their reach. They've just got to do that little bit more, and they will make that next step up the ladder. If we go into our panic zone, we're actually going to be practicing to fail. So for me, I think if I go with my other hand and I throw it really high, I'm probably not going to catch it at all. So that probably means I'm going to panic a lot. And because I've had no success at all, I have no idea how to get to that being better. I need a smaller step to get me there. So just try it now. I want you to try something that you can't do. Okay, have a go. Oh, no, that one's gone. Try again. Oh, I did it once. Okay, so can you see that the harder you make it, when you go out of that place where you can succeed and where you're only failing, that's the panic zone. There are some of our top level athletes, and probably some who are aspiring for top level, who quite like to be in that panic zone. But actually, if they're never successful, they don't get the opportunity to learn how to be successful. So we need to pull them back into the stretch zone to give them the appropriate amount of challenge to help them to make progress, to build that knowledge as they go through. So I'm going to ask you to use your thumbs up or your thumbs down on the screen now. You've got those in your reactions on the bar. And my question is, if we give everyone the same drill at the same distance, will everyone have the same success or make the same progress? If you think they will have the same success and make the same progress, can you give us a thumbs up? If you think if we give them the same drill at the same distance, they won't have the same success or the same progress, can you give us a thumbs down, please? We're getting some thumbs down. We're getting lots of thumbs down. Yeah. You can do it on your screen as well if you don't want to come onto the, so you can do it with your reactions. Looking down a few people. So the people I've seen so far, it's all been thumbs down. So I think we all agree, don't we? If we give everybody exactly the same task, but they're not all going to have the same level of success. So there are a group of things that we can use, and I'm going to do, what I'm going to be showing you is something called STEP and the inclusion spectrum. This came out of some work that was done by, oh, I've forgotten the second name. I should know it by now. But Ken Black and his Black and Stevenson in 2007. They've changed some of the spectrum. They now call it the activity inclusion model. I think it might have gone on to something else. I've taken some of this as it was originally, and I've tweaked a little bit for Boccia. So what you're seeing is their work with my twist on it. So apologies if that, I hope that doesn't confuse anybody that might have seen it before. So in English, a step is one pace. So as I'm walking, each time I make one movement, that's a step. So for us, this is a really helpful thing to remember. And we talk about progress as being in steps as well sometimes. That's another way to remember it. And these are things we can change. So let's have a little bit more of a look at some of these. So the first thing we can change is the space. And I suspect that you know this already, but just in case you don't, I've written it on here again really clearly, so that if you come back, if you want to translate this into your language, you've got all the information here so that you can take this clear idea away with you. So to make something easier for somebody, so make sure they have success when they start, you might start the drill closer. So you might do the arrow as in number 1. So you may only want them to throw 2 or 3 meters, quite short. Or you might make the target bigger. So if we look at the biggest circle at the top, That's number one. That might be what you start with. You could, of course, start with both. You could start with something really close to you and something that is a nice big target. And I would suggest that you start with that success. So if you start further away with a smaller target and then you make the target bigger or closer, it gives that feeling to the player, well, they've had to make it easier for me. Actually, start with a place where they can be successful and help them to get better. They will feel like they've achieved more. So after succeeding several times, gradually you could move the target further away. So it might go as far as in arrow number 2 or arrow number 3. Or you can make the target smaller. So again, the target can go from the size of number 1 down to 2, down to 3. I probably wouldn't do both at the same time, but what you're really judging is where is the comfort zone for the athletes, the place where you can say, oh, brilliant, you've done that every time, that's fantastic. And where is the stretch zone? Where is the zone where they can succeed some of the time, but not all of the time? That's really where they need to be doing their training. And the great thing about this simple thing is that if you've got a group, they could all be doing the same thing. You might want them to throw a ball into a hoop or onto a piece of paper, whatever. You could have some people doing it at the short distance, others at the medium, and some at the long. You could have some people using a big target, some the medium target, and some the small target. And so actually you could have your social player and your highly competitive Paralympian on the same court, and you just adjusted the distance and the size of the target for them. You can make it challenging for both of them. So this is a really useful and a nice simple way to make individual changes for individual athletes. So the next in step is the T, and that stands for task or time. And changing a task, well, one way of doing that is changing the rules. So there might be the rules that you're giving to a player for the drill they're doing or the rules that they're playing by. So the example I've given here is that one player or group might be doing all of their training in the back half of the court, while another group is doing their training only in the front half of the court. And that would be because that responds to where they're working, what they're working at, and how much challenge you want to give them. And lots of different things, lots of different reasons why you might want to change the rules for different players. So changing the task is another way of making a modification. So again, an example here could be that some players can propel the ball any way that suits them, but some might be told you're only allowed to throw underarm for this task. And that might be because they're developing that skill. So again, we can change the task about and have people doing something slightly different. They might all be aiming at the same target, but they're getting there in a slightly different way. Now, changing the time of a task can give equity. So a really good example was this. If you have a player that uses a ramp, it takes them quite a long time to line the ramp up, to maybe build the ramp up to the height that they need, and then to release the ball down it. And in the time they've taken to do that, there will be players that have maybe in BC4, or we have players with learning disabilities and other disabilities. They might be able to throw quite a number of balls in the same time that the ramp player can play one ball. So we might need to change the time allowed. If we want those different players to have the same number of practices, instead of giving them 5 minutes or 10 minutes to do that, tell them the number of times you want them to throw a ball. So the BC4 player throwing 20 balls might have done that quite quickly. The BC3 player playing 20 balls might take longer, but you're allowing them different time so that they have the same amount of practice. The other thing you can do with time is to reduce it, make the time shorter. And this puts pressure on people, and it can take somebody out of their comfort zone and maybe even right into their panic zone, because you're reducing the time a lot. And those of you that have been coaching a while, can you remember the first time you saw an athlete and they hear the official saying, 1 minute, and they immediately throw their ball because they're so worried that they've only got a minute left? It puts them into that panic zone straight away. And actually, you do some coaching with them and they start to realise that a minute is a very long time and they can take their time and they can deliver a really good ball in that time. So reducing the time allowed can really put pressure on somebody and give them pressure that is going to help them to learn how to cope with that in the future. We can change the equipment. And I love this picture. It's a picture I took in Beijing in 2008 at the Paralympic Games. And it's from, I think the player was from Argentina. And as you can see, if you look really, really closely at the foot, and under the shoe, there is a metal cup that's been extended down below the heel. And there's a small wheel on the back of the cup, like a caster. And so the player would have the assistant put the ball in the cup. The player would move their foot forwards in order to propel the ball onto the court. It's a fantastic piece of equipment that I've never seen anybody else use. And I think that's the level of creativity and inventiveness that we need for some of our players. So, of course, we do have lots of equipment we use in order to modify things for players. The most obvious one is using a ramp, an assistive device. And we use that if a player can't propel a ball independently. But I think we have to remember that we're not only focused on Paralympic players, that we do have players that want to play for fun, and we might have players that want to use a ramp but don't actually need to. And so if they're social players, I think that's fine. And they just need to know that if they want to compete, they may have to go to classification and they may have to be approved to use a ramp. As long as that's very clear, I think there's no reason why you can't give a ramp to somebody just because that's what they like to use. And then, of course, there's lots of different sorts of balls for different players. So a classic was sometimes with BC1s when they started, they couldn't propel to the back of the court, we'd give them a harder ball. Nowadays, people have lots of different balls in their sets, lots of different types of ball, and each of those balls does a different job. So by changing the equipment, we can change what the player can achieve. I know that not all clubs and not all countries have the possibility of having lots of different types of balls, but it's great when you can start to develop that. Even if you can just soften some of the balls that you have so that you have different hardnesses, it will start to give you an idea of what different balls can do. And then just like in the picture, we can provide, or we can devise, we can make up appropriate aids, things that will help a player. So sometimes if a player's on their own on court, they need to be able to pick a ball up. Do remember to put the ball somewhere where it's easy for the player to pick up. You know, I've seen players having to twist around and get things from funny places. That's not going to help them when they want to throw the ball. If we can put the ball somewhere it's nice and easy for them to reach to and pick up, it's going to help them to put all their efforts into their throwing and not into collecting the ball. And ideas, perhaps adaptations for people to use. We see a lot again in the BC3 game. We see players using head pointers. We have hand pointers that extend now. We have different things that people use. And the first time I saw somebody using a mouth stick to use their computer, that was really exciting to me because we then converted that into a mouth stick to use with the ramp. Again, just look at the player and see if you can solve the issues and help. And the final thing about changing the equipment is just to say that if you buy sports equipment, it can be expensive. And again, we know there are so many clubs that just don't have money for things like that. You've used all your money to buy the precious balls. So use equipment from home. I regularly use pieces of paper as targets. I use a flag. And we're lucky with the England flag, it's divided into pieces so we can have a big target or smaller targets. We use bottles. We can fill the bottle with sand to not make it knock over, or with water. I even use like a sheet or a duvet cover or a tablecloth, some piece of material to make a big target. So it's quite possible to find different things to use, and we can be quite creative. So, and finally, the P stands for people. So, and changing the people, we can make organizational changes with the people, and we can make personal changes, and that's changes to us as a coach. So if we look first at the organizational changes, then simple things like matching the right player with the right playing assistant can have a massive effect. It can be really difficult, I know, when somebody comes in and mum or dad is their ramp assistant, and sometimes mum or dad is the perfect person to be their ramp assistant, and sometimes mum or dad really isn't. And so as a coach, being able to match people with the right playing assistant is a really good skill to have. And if you have the luxury of having more than one coach, well, think about your coaching styles and how different you can be. So I really like it. I know a couple of coaches who are very almost opposite to me. So I'm the loud person who's very happy standing at the front of the room, thinking about everybody, organising everybody. But actually, I don't always see the quiet people who kind of maybe don't want to say that they haven't understood or need a little bit more support. And I know that I've got a couple of coaches in mind, particularly, that are really good at that. So I know that if the two of us work together, we actually pick up everybody's needs between us. And that really works well. So think about the different styles of coach that you have and the different types of athletes you have. And, find out who works well with who. And as coaches, you can support each other to understand how best to work with different athletes as well. And then we can group players together in different ways. I'm going to talk about that in a slide in a moment. Of course, the other thing that might be important with people is thinking about who you need to keep apart. Because unfortunately, we do sometimes have people that really want to argue or really rub each other up the wrong way. So sometimes we have to organise that they're not in the same place at the same time. What about us? It's actually really important that we make changes to what we do and how we coach in order to really assist our athletes in the best way. And changing our coaching style. I just kind of described some of what my coaching style is like. Well, I know that some players like that sort of rumbustious, like, come on, let's all do it together kind of coaching style. And others are much more quiet. And so I have to try and adjust myself in the way I work with each individual. And I know that can be hard sometimes give that to myself as a coaching challenge. But also thinking about the different ways we learn. So as somebody that's done a lot of tutoring and coaching, I'm very aware that I prefer to run a very practical course. It would be wonderful if we were all in the same room together and I could have got you doing things, because I think most sports people learn best when we do. So actually doing things is a really good way to learn. I can't do that here. So I've been trying to think about the way I say things and how I stress them so that you might get to hear the most important words. And if you look on this slide, I've actually put some of the words in purple. And that's because they're the words that I think are more key and the ones that perhaps I want you to remember a little bit more or to pick out a little bit more. So I'm trying to appeal to those of you who might be visual learners, who might remember that better. And in the way I'm speaking, trying to think about people who are auditory learners, who learn best by listening. And finally, really practical thing, but think about your position, because we might have players with a visual or a hearing impairment. Maybe they hear better from one side than the other. And we do definitely have players who have maybe spinal fusions, so they find it very difficult to turn to see either side. So rather than expecting them to turn to see us, we should really think about where we stand. So if we want to coach them. So I know that I've had players where if you stand to the side of them, they actually lean away from you. And that's not very good for their core. So if I see that happening, I remember to go around in front of them and face them so that it's easier for them to sit in a comfortable position because I'm standing in the right position. Those are changes that we can make as coaches. And you might be saying now, that's all very well, Sandra, you've given us some lovely ideas, but I've got far too many players to do this with. So here is what would have been probably just half of the group that I had when I was a school teacher. And because they were school people, I've had to blot out their faces. But the point is, if we look at these players, we have a range of physical abilities, we have a range of physical disabilities, and I can tell you that we have a range of learning needs as well. So within this group, there are quite a lot of things to do and to change. So what can we do about that? Well, we can group people together differently. So there's 3 or 4 different types of a kind of grouping that you can do. So the first one is open, and it means everyone does the same. And the thing with open activity is actually you've got to make it easy enough that everybody can do it. Excuse me. You've also got to make it so that everybody can answer the task. So one of the ways that we do that in Boccia, we already use open language so that individuals can respond in their own way. So a good example is we say, propel the ball. Now in Boccia, we actually also use the word throw to mean any style of how you propel the ball. So when we say throw, actually we also mean kick and we mean release it down a ramp. So throw or propel are both used as open, big tasks. If I ask you to propel the ball, you can propel it any way that suits you. But I can also make an open-ended task, so that a task that can be answered in lots of different ways. So my example here is propel the ball towards the wall. Now I haven't said how far it's got to go towards the wall. I haven't said it's got to hit the wall. I haven't said where it's got to hit the wall. So players can answer that in different ways. So our high level players might give themselves a little challenge. They might think, oh, I'm going to see how close I can get to the wall without actually touching it. So they're challenging themselves to do something different. There might be somebody else who has a visual impairment or a different impairment who just getting the ball pointing somewhere at the wall is a fantastic step for them. What happens if we're too specific is that it doesn't become an open activity anymore. So if I said to this big group of players, I want you all to propel the ball between 2 cones, 30 centimetres apart, 5 metres away, some of those players couldn't do that. And so now it's not open. It's what I've actually done is I've denied those players access to any kind of success. So I have excluded them, and that's not acceptable. So open has to be something that everybody can do. We can change our language and our task setting to make that more open so that it can be answered in different ways. But we've got to make sure that we don't exclude anybody with our activity. And the second thing we can do, the second way we can group is by modifying. So everybody might be doing the same thing, but we make changes so that everybody can be included. So we've already looked at those changes. We can change the space and the task and the time, the equipment and the people. And we can do that so we might have everybody doing something very, very similar, but actually we've got individual changes so that they can all be included. So the next way is parallel activity. So for us, often it's putting people on different courts. And it means that we're making groups that meet the needs of the players or meet the needs of what you're doing as a coach, which hopefully is aiming to meet the needs of the players anyway. So there's good and bad examples of parallel activity. So if I talk about the classification groups. You probably all know that at Paralympic level, we have 4 groups: BC1, BC2, BC3, BC4. So it might be that we want to work with the BC1 sports assistants and do some training around that. So it makes a really good idea to have a group of only BC1s on one court with their assistants so we can do that training. And then on other courts, we might have BC3s working with their assistants, and we might have 2s and 4s together doing something else. So that's absolutely fine. But if we kept those BC1s together all the time, and if we go back to that slide about our social aspect athlete and our competitive athlete, actually our competitive athlete might not be challenged to stay in that group. So instead of keeping all the athletes together in that group all the time, we might need to want to mix them up. David Smith, who is there, trains regularly with BC3 and BC4 players, and that provides him with the appropriate challenge that he needs right now in his career. So we might mix up our categories and put our beginners in one place and our experienced players in another. Or we might split up into teams and pairs. Or we might have different training areas. So we might have some people working on cross-court drills that are quite close, and we might have other people working on very long shots down the court. So we're making different areas or different sizes and shapes for people to work in, and so on. And there's as many things as you can think of. But what I want to say is I've walked into too many group sessions where you go in and the ramp players are over here and the 1s and 2s are here and the 4s are over there, and it's all separate. And I think we need to shake that up, and I think we need to think more about what our athletes need and mix people up a bit more. And then there's separate activity, and this is sometimes called specific activity, and it's where we coach a player individually because it meets their specific needs. This is not about sending somebody out. It's not about having the disabled player separate. It's because it meets needs. So a good example is a BC3 player, a ramp player who has a new assistant. Makes absolute sense for someone to go away with that player and assistant and help them to get them started on their journey of working together. No point in doing that in front of lots of people who don't have a ramp assistant or a ramp. There are other reasons, so maybe to do with the disability needs of the player. So someone who's on the autistic spectrum might find it's really hard to be in a group or be somewhere noisy or somewhere enclosed. So they might prefer to sit somewhere separate, in a separate space that they know is theirs, they know is a safe place to be. That would be a good reason to have them in a separate space. And another example would be perhaps for safety. So you might have an athlete with brittle bones, or someone with a detached retina. They're both things where these athletes must not be hit by a ball. And so if you were teaching other people to do the lob and the lobs were going all over the place, this would not be a safe place for somebody with brittle bones to be. They would need to move into another room and do some training there while you were doing that training for the lob. So safety is often a reason, but it's mostly about the needs of the athlete. So in summary, we can use STEP and the inclusion spectrum to ensure that you coach each player as an individual whenever you can. And I've just sort of marked down there as well. This is taken from work by Black and Stevenson, but it has been adapted and it reflects my thoughts to some extent as well. When you've got an athlete who has aspirations of doing really well, it's quite a good idea to put these things together into something like an individual athlete plan. And this really helps an athlete to define a specific coaching and development plan that is individual to them. So it might say things like something very specific. If they can currently get 3 balls out of 6 between the jack and their opponent's ball when they set their first ball, then it may be that they're going to try and increase that or improve that to 4 out of 6 or 5 out of 6 over a short amount of time or a set amount of time. And you would have just a few different things on there that you're focusing on. And so it's really useful because it focuses your mind on what to coach next. I think particularly at the beginning of an athlete's career, it's easy as a coach to fall into that trap of trying to coach them everything at the same time. And it probably doesn't help. If you think about the way you learn, if somebody just, throws an encyclopedia at you, you're not going to learn it all. You need to do it bit by bit. So having that plan will help people to learn about how they can do it bit by bit. Sorry, I just want to go back again. Yeah, there we go. So that plan can also be shared across different coaches. So you might find as somebody gets up maybe into your national squad, they've also got their home coach. They might even have a club or a regional coach or something like that. So if they've got a plan, you can share that plan with all of the coaches so that everybody knows what they're working to, and everybody knows what stages they're at. And it just helps the athlete to, if you like, hear one voice and not be conflicted with different things that they're hearing. And even within a general coaching session, if either the coach or the athlete understand the training aims that are in their individual plan, then they can use step to adapt the drill to be within their own stretch zone. So I might set something that's not quite challenging enough for somebody, and if they recognise that, they might say, well, is it okay if we just do that at a bit of a bigger distance? Or I don't really want to aim for the jack, I want to aim for only for this half of the jack. So we can all change individually. And I like that those athletes who can understand everything, we give them that right as well to say, look, you can change the challenge I give you, and we can work on that together. And finally, players develop better at their own pace. So some are going to take longer than others. It doesn't mean that they won't reach the same heights, but it's another reason why we should treat them as individuals. So, if we go in with the same curriculum, we always say that in week 1, we're going to coach this, and in week 2, we're going to coach that. Well, some athletes, it won't be fast enough for them. And some athletes, it'll be too fast for them. And very quickly, we end up with those that are thriving and succeeding and those that aren't. And for all those reasons, I want to remind you to coach the athlete and not the sport. Thank you.